All right, here we go, Panthers. The era of good feelings. Is it really? That's what this time period is called. So this is after the War of 1812, and we talked about briefly in the last video. The War of 1812. The United States has won against the greatest nation that the world had ever known to that point for a second time. I mean, things seem to be going pretty well. So James Monroe is elected president in 1816. James Madison, keeping in a tradition that George Washington created and then Thomas Jefferson followed, James Madison does not want to run for a second term. James Monroe becomes the next president. He's overwhelmingly, it's a landslide victory for him to be the fifth president of the United States. He defeats the Federalist, Rufus King. Now, the Federalist Party at this point, they're on like life support, right? They're not doing well. They opposed the War of 1812. They said the War of 1812 is Mr. Madison's war. Federalists were openly hoping that England would win the War of 1812, so it would embarrass the Jeffersonians and the Democratic Republicans. So because they seemed to be openly rooting against the United States, which they were, it really turns off a lot of Americans. And so the Federalist Party is just in shambles at this point. And they run this guy, Rufus King, for president. Really? Rufus? President Rufus? President King? That just seems like an oxymoron, right? President King. I don't know. This is the last gasp of the Federalist Party. After this election of 1816, they're done. They're absolutely done. James Monroe will be the last of the founding fathers to be president. Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Madison, and then Monroe. All of them were signers of the not signers declaration, all of them were at the Constitutional Convention. They were all involved in the Constitutional Convention or the founding of the nation. All of them were very, very prominent members of that. And Monroe is going to be the last one. He's also the fourth president. We've had 5 presidents. 4 of them have been from Virginia. And this begins what is known as the Virginia dynasty. Right? That seems like you have to be from Virginia to be elected president. And so this is known as the era of good feelings. And here's why it's known as that. We had just won a war against England for the second time. Right? For the second time in 40 years, we fought a war and we outlasted the English. And so there was this sense of patriotism and national pride. For the first time, a lot of people begin referring to themselves as Americans. 4th of July becomes a big holiday. People begin to, I just told you, they identify themselves as Americans rather than where they came from. They're no longer, Scotch-Irish. They're no longer English or whatever. They're Americans. There's really only one political party, the Democratic Republicans. The Federalist Party has died, so we don't have these political factions, these political rivalries that Washington warned about in his farewell address. There's not any war, really, for the first time in a long time in Europe. There's nothing really taking place in Europe that could possibly draw the United States into a war. So it's a pretty good time, right? Everything seems to be going pretty well. North and the South, which historically had never liked each other, going all the way back to the colonial times, North and South seem to be getting along about as well. Oh, the bell just went off. The North and South are getting along just about as well as they could at that point. So everything seems to be going well, right? This seems to be a smooth sailing for the country at this time. So into American history comes one of, in my opinion, one of the most important but most forgotten figures in American history. This guy, I love this guy. He deserves his own musical, I think. He's just wickedly smart. And fortunately, he's kind of been forgotten. It's going well, and you? Great. Good. Well, that was weird. That was the custodian that came in. I don't know. So, anyways, this guy, back to what we were talking about. So, anyways, this guy, forgotten. He's a forgotten figure in American history. Super duper smart, super duper important. Could have been, should have been president, but he never was. This guy, Henry Clay. Henry Clay is going to become a very major part of our story for the next couple of weeks. He's crazy smart. Henry Clay is the Speaker of the House at this time. And again, remember, Speaker of the House is probably the second most powerful, political position in the country at that time. Speaker of the House. Henry Clay comes up with this plan he calls the American system, and it's kind of adding on to Hamilton's financial plan. Henry Clay can see that the United States is expanding, and he knows as we expand, we're going to find more and more and more resources. Who knows what's out there? And Henry Clay believes that if this government does things properly in the economy, we can be, should be, will be one day an economic powerhouse, the likes of which the world had never known before. So he comes up with this system called the American system, which again is an add-on to Hamilton's financial plan. His argument is the United States should promote its own manufacturing, that we can compete on the world stage in the world economy with European factories. We can do that. And in order to do that, the United States government needs to heavily invest in infrastructure. We need to build roads, right? There's not really any well-defined road system in the United States. We have trails, which are not really maintained. And if weather's bad, it's hard to get across and they get washed out. He says we need to have a maintained system of roads. We need to build bridges. We need to the government needs to invest and help people build factories and invest in the country. And the way to do this, he said, is to increase tariffs, right? Not crazy increase like Thomas Jefferson did, but increase tariffs so that American manufacturing becomes more attractive and more Americans will want to open up factories, especially if the government's going to give them money, loan them money in order to do that. And if we have a well-defined system of roads and canals, which was another big thing that was coming about. They're building canals, artificial waterways, connecting one waterway with a larger waterway. We can build canals, we can build bridges, we can have well-defined roads. Manufacturing and trade will begin to flourish, he believes. And a key to all of this, Henry Clay said, is the Bank of the United States, which is in its second generation. It's been renewed, right? It was a 20-year charter. It's been renewed. We got to keep the bank going because that's the key, because the bank is going to fund all of these internal improvements. So that's the American system. The United States government should heavily invest in American infrastructure and industry to help create this robust American economy. That's Henry Clay. American system. Super duper important. Make sure you know it. Make sure you understand it, right? This American system is going to be really, really important. Oh, there's the bell again. The American system is going to be really, really important for the next 30, 40 years. Okay. Remember it. All right. Then we have a problem as Henry Clay's American system is getting going. In 1818, we have a perfect balance of states. There are 11 free states. There are 11 slave states. And this has been done intentionally as a free state comes in, we add a slave state. As a slave state comes into the country, we add a free state. So we always have this perfect balance of free states, slave states in Congress. And now we have two new states who have enough population, who have enough infrastructure, who have enough whatever to become states, to become legitimate states in the Union. One is Missouri, the other is Maine. Obviously, if you look here, here's Maine. Maine is obviously going to be a free state. It's way north. And slavery just is not going to work in Maine. Maine can't grow any big cash crops. They can't grow cotton. They can't grow tobacco. They can't grow rice. They can't grow indigo. They can't grow any of these big cash crops that slavery depends on. However, Missouri is a real problem. Missouri is not north, but it's not south either. It's kind of in the middle. And Missouri, parts of Missouri, southern Missouri, can grow some of these big cash crops to support slavery. Oh boy. Well, the South says if you're letting Maine in as a free state, which makes sense because slavery can't be in Maine, then obviously Missouri has to come in as a slave state. So we maintain this balance of 12 states and 12 states. The North argues that Missouri is, for the most part, north. And most of Missouri can't grow these big cash crops. So therefore, Missouri should be a free state, which would make it 13 free states, 11 slave states. Well, the South is not going to have this. The South is constantly going all the way back to the creation of the Constitution. The South is constantly worried that the North will outlaw slavery if they ever got the chance, and the North would. So the South desperately does not want this. So the South says, if you're going to make Missouri a free state, we're going to secede. We're going to leave the country. Oh boy. So Henry Clay, master of the American system, Henry Clay comes riding to the rescue. This is what Henry Clay does. Henry Clay saves the nation so many times from revolution and civil war. Okay? Henry Clay comes in. Henry Clay, in order for the American system to work, he's got to have the South because the South makes these products that the North needs for manufacturing, cotton and tobacco and things like that. So the American system is not going to work if the South is gone. So Henry Clay comes in and he works out a compromise between the North and the South. This compromise is super duper duper important. You got to know it. It's called the Missouri Compromise, or sometimes it's known as the Compromise of 1820, right? If you hear the Missouri Compromise, you hear the Compromise of 1820, they're both the exact same thing, okay? They both mean the same thing. So here's the compromise. Missouri will come in as a slave state, okay? So we have 12 slave, 12 free. We maintain this balance. And then Henry Clay says we're going to draw a line essentially along the southern border of Missouri at the 3630 parallel, right? We're just going to draw a line clear across the country at the 3630 parallel. And all the states north of that line will be free. All the states south of that line will be slave. And I know it says free. I just caught that. It should be slave, right? So all the states north will be free. All the states south of this line will be slave. Okay, so that's the Missouri Compromise. Now, both sides agreed to this, which in retrospect, for me, doesn't make a lot of sense because if you look at the map, right, I think this is where maybe the South gets this reputation as being maybe not that smart because they agree to this. They go, yeah, that's a good deal. But if you look at the map at this time, where else is the South going to expand? Right? We don't have Florida yet. Florida still belongs to Spain. We have this, but here's the line. Where's most of the land at, right? All of this belongs to Mexico. The North is going to get a lot more states out of this. But the South agrees. This compromise, you probably have noticed, you just don't know that you noticed, because this compromise of 1820, leaves a permanent scar across the United States. If you look at the map, this scar extends pretty much the entire continent. And at one time, it went across Nevada here. This used to be part of California. So the scar used to go all the way to the California line across Nevada. This scar is still there from the Missouri Compromise. Oh, crazy, right? All right. Next thing, we're going to get another piece of property here. 1817, Spain, which is down here, begins to arm Native Americans in Florida. And they were encouraging the Native Americans to attack Americans in Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi. Alabama and Mississippi at that time did not go to the Gulf of Mexico. So Spain's arming these Indians down there to attack. Okay? Monroe sends the military down to stop these raids. Right? So he sends the U.S. military down here to stop these raids. The military is led by the American war hero, an American war hero that comes out of the War of 1812, Andy Jackson. Now, sending Andy Jackson down there is not a mistake. It is very intentional, because Andy Jackson has a reputation of being kind of a loose cannon. That Andy Jackson just kind of does whatever Andy Jackson does. And Andy Jackson just doesn't care. So Andy Jackson, one day while he's patrolling the border along the Florida border here, sees some Indians come across and attack Americans. Andy Jackson leads the army into Florida to chase these Indians. We've just invaded Spain, not Splin. Holy cow, there's all kinds of things here. Not Splin, but Spain. We've just invaded Spain, right? The American army has just gone into Florida and invaded Spain. So Spain is very upset about this, that the United States has just invaded its territory. Monroe orders Jackson to get out of Florida. James Monroe then tells Florida, gosh, I'm really sorry about that. Jackson, you can't control Jackson. Jackson just kind of does what he does. Jackson's a loose cannon. He's just his own person. I'm sorry. I got him out, but I can't promise that he's not going to go down there again. Spain is in this process of becoming of being a dying empire, right? They have not really been doing well for the last 100 years. France pushes them around. England has been pushing them around. Spain is pretty weak at this point. And they're very worried if they somehow, some way end up in a war with the United States, even though the United States definitely is not any type of military power. Spain's not certain they could win. So Spain doesn't know what to do, right? Because they definitely don't want Jackson coming down here, because that may force them into a war that may not win. So Monroe comes up with a plan. So I'll tell you what, I know how we can keep Jackson out of invading Florida. What if you sell us Florida? So Spain agrees. And this treaty is called the Adams-Onís Treaty. And all of the Spanish territory that was left in the United States, which is all the purple here that you see in the map here, this is Spanish. This is all Spanish. And then this is that's Britain. This little tiny part in Colorado, right around where Steamboat Springs is, that was Spanish, right? In a very weird twist of fate, when the Louisiana Louisiana territory was being tossed back and forth between France and Spain, and then back to France and then the United States, the map, the boundaries got kind of messed up. And in redrawing the boundaries, Spain maintained a little piece of land here that just kind of in an oversight. Spain retained a little tiny part of land in the western part of the United States, which is in present-day Colorado. So the United States gets all Spanish territory for $5 million. So Monroe has just expanded the size of the country again. Now we've got all of Florida here. Mississippi and Alabama now reach the Mississippi or the Gulf of Mexico. We've got all of the Louisiana, what will become Louisiana, and a little teeny part of Colorado up here. All because Spain didn't want to deal with this lunatic Andrew Jackson invading them. And then this is Monroe's big accomplishment. This is something you gotta know. This is really, really important. 1820, Monroe is reelected president. We're going to have Monroe until at least 1824. And the United States now begins thinking, now that we've got Florida, we're beginning to slowly push into Louisiana territory. The United States now begins thinking seriously about expanding and taking over this entire landmass from sea to shining sea, from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. The United States is thinking about moving all the way out here. However, there are some problems. The only thing that could stop the United States really from expanding from here to here at this point are other European powers. Russia owned Alaska at that time, and Russia was beginning to claim that they owned all this land coming down the Pacific Northwest. That could stop American expansion. Russia was a pretty powerful country. So Monroe is going to issue the first major foreign policy statement for the United States. This is the first time the United States really has an official foreign policy. And it's important, and it will be carried on even up to today. This kind of still is in effect today. It's called the Monroe Doctrine. Here's what the Monroe Doctrine essentially says. The entire Western Hemisphere, North, Central, South America, is the domain of the United States. The United States is the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere. This is our domain, and all foreign powers, Europe, are supposed to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. Do not come to the Western Hemisphere and establish more colonies. In exchange for that, the United States agrees to stay out of Europe. Europe stays out of the Western Hemisphere. The United States will stay out of Europe. Europe, for the most part, abides by this. Not because, again, we weren't this dominant military or economic or industrial power, because we weren't. We're still pretty insignificant in terms of, in contrast to the powers in Europe. That's not us. But here's why Europe abides by this. The scales of balance in Europe are so close at this time, especially between England and France. And Russia plays in there as well. Russia is fairly powerful, probably not as powerful as England or France, but they're right there. And Europe, since everything is pretty much balanced, they're very worried that if the United States were to get involved in some sort of European conflict on the side of one of these powers, it would totally tip the balance of power in Europe. And they don't want to chance that. So to keep the United States out of Europe and tipping the balance of power in Europe, Europe pretty much abides by this doctrine. And this solidifies the American desire for isolationism. Basically, you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. And this will be American foreign policy until World War I. Just leave us alone. And it comes out of the Monroe Doctrine. And Monroe Doctrine is still in effect to some degree today. We don't get a lot of foreign influence in the Western Hemisphere, right? And it kind of be traced back to the Monroe Doctrine. Really important that you know that. All right, here we go. We got an election. 1824. Monroe says he's not going to run for a third term, right? Washington didn't do it. Jefferson didn't do it. Madison didn't do it. I'm not going to do it. So Secretary of State John Quincy Adams is chosen to succeed him. He goes, this is who I think should succeed me. Okay. Adams supports Western expansion in the American system. Right? He really likes American. He wants to move out west. He really likes the American system. He thinks the American system is really great. Monroe's Secretary of War, John C. Calhoun, also runs. Henry Clay, Speaker of the House, also runs. And then there's a joke candidate that people just kind of jokingly say, wouldn't it be funny if this guy runs? Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson starts off as a joke candidate. Everybody thinks it would be hilarious. Can you imagine what would happen if Andrew Jackson were elected president? That's hilarious because the guy's a lunatic. The guy's a loose cannon, right? Can you imagine? And it's not taken very seriously. Jackson doesn't take it seriously either. Jackson thinks it's kind of funny as well. Until he begins to realize that there is a large segment of voters out there that don't think it's funny. They think it's a great idea. And then Jackson begins to take the idea seriously as well. Maybe I could be president. All right, so election day comes. Here's how it breaks down. John Quincy Adams comes in first, right? He's the son, by the way, of John Adams. He's the son of John Adams. Jackson comes in first. Oh, boy. Oh, we've been down this road before. Henry Clay, Speaker of the House, comes in third. John C. Calhoun comes in fourth. Oh, boy. The election is a tie. Remember the last time we had a tie between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr? Remember who decided that? The House of Representatives. Who is the Speaker of the House of Representatives? Who is the leader of the House of Representatives? Who is the one who lays down the law in the House of Representatives? Henry Clay. And Henry Clay, although he would love to be president, likes Adams, and he thinks Jackson is a lunatic and thinks Jackson would absolutely destroy this country. So Henry Clay tells the House of Representatives, you vote for Adams. And Jackson is furious over this. Jackson and his supporters call this the corrupt bargain, that they believe there was some sort of deal worked out between Adams and Clay, because Henry Clay is going to be named Secretary of State under John Quincy Adams. And Jackson and his supporters believe there was this corrupt bargain where Adams tells Clay, if you make me president, I will make you Secretary of State. Now, there is no evidence whatsoever in anybody's personal papers, Clay's or Adams or anybody who was connected to this event. There is no evidence at all that there was any type of deal. But Jackson and his supporters maintain and will always maintain there was a corrupt bargain at work here. All right, so John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams supports the American system. He thinks it's a great idea. He really can see the merits of this plan. He also wants the United States to become a leader in arts and literature and music. He wants there to be a unique form of American arts and American literature and American music. Right now, all of our arts and literature and music are all European or very, very close to European. Right? Adams wants a unique form of American art and culture. He supports the expansion of public education. Adams believes in order to be a good citizen, in order to participate, you have to be educated. So he wants to expand public education. He hates slavery. Like his father, he is a staunch opponent. He is a abolitionist to the core. However, he never really pushes these agendas. He feels that it's beneath the presidency to go out and campaign and go out and ask and go out and beg people to vote a certain way, to push a certain agenda. He doesn't believe that's the role of the president. So he doesn't do it. He thinks that's beneath the presidency. He believes that Congress and others would simply just do these things, that they would support the American system, that they would actively um, create an American system of arts and literature and music, that they would say, yes, we need more public education. Let's expand it, that they would get rid of slavery. He believes that they would do all these things simply because it's the right thing to do. This doesn't happen. This is not the way politics work. You have to go out and politic. You have to go out and push your agenda. You have to go out and beg and borrow and steal and cajole and get people to agree with you. People don't just do things because they think it's right. People do things because they're kind of convinced to do it. So for 4 years, very little happened. And it brings us to 1828. And Jackson and his supporters have been preparing for 4 years for this moment. Followers of Jackson are beginning to call themselves Jacksonians. Jackson calls them Democrats. This is the beginning of the modern day Democratic Party. Happens with Jackson. Jackson is the father of the Democratic Party, modern day Democratic Party. Jackson wants to expand the vote. He wants more people to be allowed to vote, the common man to vote. And Jackson begins to call the Democrats the party of the common man. All right, let's do Election Day. 1828, Jackson actively campaigns for the presidency. This is the first time in American politics that a presidential candidate has actually gone out and asked people to vote for them, gone out and begged people to vote for him. We have the beginning of modern day campaigns, what would look like a modern day campaign where the crowd of people come and there's food and it's a festive atmosphere and the candidate gets up and gives a speech. That all begins with Jackson. Jackson's the first one to do this. Jackson didn't have a real platform. He didn't really advocate for anything other than Adams and Clay stole the 1820 election and the National Bank is unconstitutional. Oh, where have we heard that before? Jackson tells people he's one of you. He's not part of the Washington political elite. He's going to go to Washington and he's going to clean it up. He's going to fight for the common man because he's one of you. He's not one of them. He's a frontiersman. That's very appealing to the growing frontier. Jackson comes from Tennessee, out on the frontier. That's all of this is very appealing to the masses. Adams refuses to campaign. Clay begs him, go out and meet people, tell people why people should vote for you. Adams refuses. Again, that's unpresidential to do that. Presidents don't ask people to vote for them. People don't beg people to vote for them. People will vote for him because they know he's right. Clay, an act of desperation, goes out and campaigns for Adams. Now, Adams is not a likable person. He's not charismatic. He's not personable. He's very cold. He doesn't have a lot of friends, so he's very hard to get close to. Jackson is very personable. Jackson is very charismatic. People like Jackson, right? So Clay is out trying to tell people to vote for Adams. Adams won't come talk to you, but I am. Election day comes, and here's how it breaks down. Jackson wins in a landslide. Woof. And Henry Clay is beside himself. Henry Clay is now convinced that everything that he hoped America could be, should be, and will be is done. Jackson's going to destroy his American system. Jackson's going to get rid of the bank. Jackson is going to destroy this nation. Henry Clay cannot believe what's about to happen. And we're done. All right, Panthers. Until next time, have a good one.